If you knew, for an absolute fact, that you were going to die this afternoon, would you spend your morning trying to learn something new?
Oh, man. I mean, that is a really heavy question to start with.
Right. It's intense.
Yeah. And, well, most people would probably say no. And to be honest, they'd want to, I don't know, spend time with their family, eat a favorite meal, or perhaps just completely panic.
Yeah, I'd probably be in the panic camp, honestly.
Exactly. The idea of, like, sitting down to read a challenging book or study a completely new concept, it seems almost absurd if the clock is ticking that loudly, you know?
It does. But that's actually the core of what we're getting into today. Most would say no, but today's source material argues that if you aren't trying to learn on your very last day on Earth, you have completely misunderstood what education is actually for.
Which is such a wild premise.
It really is. So we are doing a deep dive into a fascinating essay by an author named Shufeng. It was published in January 2024, and it's titled The Necessity of Lifelong Learning and Education. And, well, our mission today for this deep dive is to explore this author's radical framework, a framework that basically fundamentally redefines what learning means across the entire span of a human life.
Right. And when we say the entire span, we really have to emphasize how much the author is, resetting our timeline here. Because one of the most striking things in this text right off the bat is the assertion that the journey of life is so remarkably long that a person who is 80 years old is, and I quote, still just a child.
Wait, 80 years old is a child?
Literally a child. That's how he frames it.
That is just a wild way to view the world. I mean, in modern society, we treat 80-year-olds like they are the finished product, like they're at the end of the line.
Yeah, totally done.
Right. But viewing them as kids in the grand scheme of the universe, I mean, that brings us right back to that intense opening question about dying this afternoon. The text actually uses this very powerful ancient quote to make this point. It says, "If in the morning I were to gain knowledge of the correct path in life, I would be able to die at sunset without regret."
It's a beautiful quote. And it completely flips the script on what the actual purpose of learning is. Because, we are so heavily conditioned to think of education as well as a utility.
Like a tool.
Exactly. You learn a skill so you can get a job. And you get a job so you can buy a house, feed yourself, pay the bills.
Yeah, standard survival stuff.
Right. But if you are dying at sunset, the utility of learning vanishes instantly. There's no job to get. But this text argues that the learning itself, like the actual clearing of internal confusion, the gaining of truth, that is the ultimate goal.
It's not about using it.
No, it allows you to let go of your worldly attachments and just leave peacefully. It is not about what you can do with the knowledge. It is about how the acquisition of truth changes your actual state of being.
Wow. I always picture our typical view of education like a role-playing video game.
Oh, I like that. Like an RPG.
Yeah. You start out at level 1, right?
Yeah.
And you go to school, you study, you grind, and eventually you hit, let's say, level 25. You get your university degree, you secure a career, and then you just stop leveling up.
You've maxed out the stats you need.
Exactly. You just assume you have all the tools you need in your inventory, and now you just, I don't know, play out the rest of the game with what you have.
Yeah, we really do view adulthood as a plateau. Like, you climb this really steep mountain of formal education in your youth, and then you just sort of walk along a relatively flat ridge for the next 50 years until you retire.
Just cruising.
But if we accept Shuifeng's premise that an 80-year-old is still essentially a toddler, and that we must quite literally keep leveling up until the very morning of our death, the obvious question becomes, well, what exactly are we supposed to be studying for 80-plus years?
Right, because we aren't just memorizing math equations or grammar rules anymore.
Exactly. So what does the curriculum of a lifetime actually look like?
Well, the cool thing is the author provides exactly that. He breaks it down into a highly specific 4-stage chronological roadmap for human learning.
And it's a really fascinating structure.
It goes like this. In adolescence, you learn knowledge. In youth, you learn skills. After middle age, you learn philosophy. And in old age, you learn Tao.
Let's spend some time on those first 2 stages, because they sound a lot like what we traditionally call school.
Yeah, right, they do. But what is the functional distinction there, like between learning knowledge in adolescence and learning skills in youth?
It is basically the difference between gathering raw materials and learning how to actually build a functioning house with them.
Okay, I'm with you.
So adolescence is about basic literacy of the world. It is acquiring raw data understanding, historical facts, grammar, basic science, and social norms.
The building blocks.
Right. Then youth is when you take that raw data and refine it into specific utility. Skills are how you apply knowledge to generate value. You learn how to, write code, how to perform surgery, how to weld, or even just how to manage a spreadsheet.
It's very practical.
Entirely practical. This is entirely the survival stage.
That maps perfectly onto how our society is structured.
Mm.
You go to high school for the foundational knowledge, and then you go to university or a trade school for the skills.
Yep.
But then, right when society hands you a diploma and tells you that you are done, the author's curriculum shifts radically.
Mm-hmm.
After middle age, the focus turns to philosophy.
You move from the practical to the abstract. Instead of asking how to execute a task, you start asking why you were doing it at all.
The existential pivot.
Exactly. Because you have spent decades surviving and participating in the autonomy, and now the task is to understand the actual meaning behind that participation. And then finally, in old age, you transition to learning Tao.
Learning Tao in old age. I mean, what does studying Tao actually look like in practice? Is it just like retreating to meditate on a mountain somewhere?
Not necessarily a mountain, no. It is really about understanding the fundamental laws and the underlying flow of the universe. Think about your youth, right? In the skill stage, you are actively trying to manipulate the world to your advantage.
Hustling, trying to make things happen.
Great, you are trying to bend the environment to yield a paycheck or to gain status. But learning Tao is the exact opposite mechanism.
Opposite how?
It involves studying the natural rhythms of existence so that you can align yourself with them rather than fighting against them. You are seeking to understand your place within the broader cosmos, effectively letting go of the need to control everything around you.
Which is super interesting because the author actually makes a very personal observation about what happens if you refuse to make this pivot into the later stages.
Right. He gets very candid here.
Yeah, Dufeng writes about looking back on his own life and realizing that doing nothing, engaging in what he calls pure enjoyment, actually leads to regret and pain. He claims that if he isn't creating, he basically has to be learning, otherwise he suffers.
It's a strong statement.
It is, and I have to push back on this a bit, to be honest. I mean, sitting on a beautiful beach, drinking a cold piña colada, and doing absolutely nothing in retirement is the literal dream most people are working toward.
The ultimate goal for so many, yeah.
Right. Are we really saying that taking a permanent vacation is a source of pain?
Yeah.
Is the human mind like a shark that has to keep swimming through new ideas just to breathe and stay vital?
That's a great analogy, actually. Think of the human mind not as a static container, but as a body of water.
Okay.
If a river is flowing, it is clear, vital, and full of life. But if you dam that river up, if you stop the input of new ideas and just sit on that beach indefinitely, the water stops moving. It stagnates.
It turns into a swamp.
Precisely. It becomes a swamp. The novelty wears off. The piña colada gets warm. When the mind isn't actively engaged in creation or the pursuit of truth, it inevitably turns inward. It starts ruminating.
Overthinking everything.
Exactly. The text argues that once a person stops learning, their trajectory in life becomes fixed. You become trapped in an unexamined mind, cycling through the exact same resentments, the same anxieties, and the same narrow worldview over and over again.
Wow.
Yeah, pure, stagnant enjoyment becomes a psychological trap. Lifelong learning is the continuous flow of fresh water that keeps the ecosystem of the mind healthy.
That honestly changes the whole perspective on retirement for me.
Hmm.
But if continuous learning is the only way to avoid that swamp of resentment, why do so many of us stop at level 25?
That's the big question.
Right. Why is it such a struggle to keep the water flowing? Because this roadmap of knowledge, skills, philosophy, and Tao, it sounds elegant, but adopting it feels like a massive uphill battle.
And the author argues it is an uphill battle. But it's an uphill battle because the people who originally taught us how to play the game were broken themselves.
Oh, this is where it gets heavy.
It does. The text offers a rather dark diagnosis of the human condition here. We don't just start out ignorant. We are shaped by deeply flawed environments from the very moment we are born.
Yeah, this part of the reading is incredibly blunt. Schwiffing states that 98% of people do not receive a good education from their parents when they are young. 98%.
Almost everyone.
Basically everyone. He refers to the vast majority of humanity as essentially being underdeveloped.
And he traces this back to the parents having a warped worldview themselves. Parents pass down flawed values because they themselves never moved past the survival stage.
They never hit the philosophy or Tao stages.
Right, they never learned it, so they can only teach their children their own anxieties, prejudices, and limited definitions of success. Su Feng uses a really vivid metaphor here, describing parents as molds.
Molds. Like, makes me think of a 3D printer. Yeah, imagine you buy a brand new state-of-the-art 3D printer, right? And you download a file to print a perfect symmetrical cube. But there is a tiny, almost invisible glitch in the printer's base code.
Right, a flaw in the system itself.
Exactly. No matter how high quality the plastic you use is or how much time you give it, every single cube the printer produces is going to have a warp in it. It is unavoidable because the machine itself, the mold, is defective. Products poured from defective mold will inherently carry the defects of the mold.
That is spot on. Because you didn't establish a comprehensive, accurate worldview when you were young, you are branded with that defect. The text claims this early cultural environment is the mechanical root cause of lifelong willfulness, stubbornness, short-sightedness, and selfishness.
That is a harsh reality to face.
It is. And once that character is poured and sets, it is incredibly difficult to correct.
But wait, we don't just rely on our parents. We send kids to primary school, middle school, and eventually university. Shouldn't a formal education system act as a corrective force for that warped 3D printed cube?
You would hope so, right? But the author argues that the global school system actually reinforces the warp.
Reinforces it. How?
Well, Kufeng points out a very serious problem. Worldwide, almost all the knowledge taught in schools, from primary all the way up through university, is exclusively about how to survive. It completely ignores how to be a person and how to relate to nature.
When you say they only teach survival, what does that actually look like in our modern reality?
Just look at the hyper-specialization of modern careers. I mean, our educational systems prioritize STEM fields, finance, and business administration because they generate immediate economic output.
Yeah, they teach you how to get a job.
Exactly. We teach people how to outcompete others for limited resources. A university degree is increasingly viewed merely as a ticket to a higher-paying job. This system completely ignores teaching knowledge about how to actually be a person, how to achieve internal peace, or how to understand the relationship between humanity and nature.
So it is a total focus on economic output over human flourishing. Which brings a fascinating scale to this ignorance. Because the author insists that absolutely no one is immune to this. Not global presidents, not billionaires, not elite scholars or professors.
Yeah, we tend to look at a billionaire or a world leader and assume they have figured life out. Like, they won the survival game, right?
Right, they have all the resources.
But Su Feng argues that their non-material structure of life, their core spiritual and philosophical framework, is still highly defective. They have maximized their skills, sure, but they remain spiritually underdeveloped.
And the text makes a massive leap here, connecting that internal underdevelopment to external crises. It claims that this defective structure in our leaders and the general public actually leads to disharmony and disasters in nature.
Yes.
But how does subjective human ignorance mechanically translate to a natural disaster?
It comes down to how we treat the environment when we are trapped in a survival mindset. Think about it. When a CEO or a political leader lacks a philosophical understanding of their place in the universe, they view nature merely as a resource to be exploited for short-term gain.
Right, it's just raw materials for profit.
Exactly. And this leads to destructive supply chains, pollution, deforestation, and massive carbon emissions. The internal chaos, the greed, short-sightedness, and selfishness poured from that defective mold we talked about, it manifests as literal physical damage to the planet. The failure to learn Tao eventually results in ecological collapse.
Wow. So a climate crisis isn't just a technological failure or a policy failure. It is a profound educational failure.
That's exactly the argument.
If our billionaires and presidents are just toddlers with bank accounts who never learn to connect with the universe, it means our entire modern metric for success is completely backward.
Our metrics measure wealth and power, which are simply tools of survival. True maturity, according to this framework, isn't about accumulating more tools. It is about transcending the need for them entirely.
Okay, but this raises a huge problem. If our parents are defective moles, and our global school systems are obsessed only with economic output, and our leaders are spiritually underdeveloped, who is actually qualified to guide us out of this trap?
It's a very fair question.
If we are supposed to study philosophy and Tao in our old age, who can actually teach us?
The author outlines a hierarchy of educators to answer this, showing a progression that eventually requires us to leave human mentors behind entirely.
Leave humans behind.
Yeah. He lists parents, kindergarten teachers, and university professors at the bottom of this hierarchy. Above them are craftsmen and masters of specific trades. Higher still are virtuous people and what he calls saints among human beings.
Wait, hold on. If these are genuine saints and masters, shouldn't they have moved past the survival stage? Why aren't they sufficient guides for learning the Tao?
Because every human being, no matter how saintly or wise, is constrained by their own subjectivity.
Their own bias.
Exactly. A saint is still viewing the universe through the lens of their specific time, their culture, and their individual human experience. They might have way less of a warp than the average person, sure, but they are still a product of a human mold. Their perspective is inherently one-sided. Therefore, a human teacher cannot completely elevate another person's body, mind, and spirit to ultimate truth.
Ah, I see. So we have to graduate from human subjectivity entirely. We have to shift our reliance away from people.
Precisely. The text states that the ultimate education must rely on foundational, transcendent texts. And Feng specifically highlights three major ones: the Gospel in the New Testament, the Diamond Sutra, and the Tao Te Ching.
So Christianity, Buddhism, and Taoism. Three incredibly dense, ancient pillars of wisdom.
Yeah.
But how do these specific texts act differently than a human teacher? Like, what do they actually do to the mind to strip away our biases?
Well, let's look at their core mechanics. The gospel emphasizes profound self-sacrifice, universal love, and letting go of worldly wealth.
Right.
The Diamond Sutra is a central text in Mahayana Buddhism that fundamentally deconstructs the illusion of the self and the material world, teaching deep non-attachment. And the Tao Te Ching focuses on wu-wei, or non-action, teaching how to flow seamlessly with the natural order, rather than forcing your own will upon it.
So they all share a common thread of dismantling the human ego.
Exactly. A human teacher might try to add to your knowledge, but these texts are designed to subtract your illusions. They challenge the very core of the survival instinct that our schools basically drilled into us.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they act as a mirror reflecting the fundamental laws of the universe, unclouded by a single person's ego or agenda. By engaging with them in old age, you begin to identify and unlearn the specific defects of the mold you were poured from.
So as we age, we're meant to graduate from flawed human mentors to these ancient cross-cultural pillars of wisdom. Does this mean the ultimate goal of learning isn't to get smarter by cramming more data into our heads, but it is a systematic process of stripping away our flawed human biases?
Yes, exactly that. You turn to these texts because they offer a pure reflection of reality, allowing you to finally understand your place in the cosmos without the interference of human stubbornness or short-sightedness.
Let's zoom out and synthesize this journey we've just been on for a second, because there's a lot here. For anyone listening, the traditional timeline of life is just broken.
Yeah.
We are taught that by 25, we are fully baked adults ready to just play out the clock.
Yep.
But in reality, at 80, we are still children in the eyes of the universe.
Yeah.
If we stop learning, our minds become stagnant swamps of resentment and fixing our trajectory toward pain.
We have to evolve.
Right. We must move from learning the raw knowledge of adolescence to the survival skills of youth, and then bravely pivot into philosophy and Tao. We have to overcome the defective molds of our upbringing and break out of a school system obsessed only with survival and economic output.
It's the only way.
And ultimately, we must graduate from human bias and seek transcendent truth.
It is a massive undertaking, but a necessary one to live fully. And, to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today, let's reconsider the author's critique of our schools. Our current survival-based education entirely misses the relationship between people and nature. We've seen how that system produces a world of stressed-out billionaires, flawed leaders, and environmental disasters. So imagine for a moment, what would a primary school actually look like if its core subject wasn't math or reading or how to secure a career, but was simply how to be a human being in harmony with nature?
That is wow.
How different would the molds of the next generation be?
That is a profound question to walk away with. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And remember the challenge we started with. Even if you knew for an absolute fact you're going to die this afternoon, go out and spend your morning learning something new. Keep the water flowing. See you next time.